video we'll be doing an overview of the different transport systems in plants. So we're going to think about the structure of the leaf, so how the leaf is actually organized with the different cells and tissues and the functions of them. And then we're going to look at a bigger picture in terms of, okay, how can different chemicals be transported between the different organs of a plant? So how does it go from the roots up to the leaves, or from the leaves to everywhere else? And we're going to look at the processes and the different organs and structures involved within. So let's start with the structure of a leaf, which we can see in this picture on the right here. So in this picture, you can see that that's a cross section of a leaf. So imagine you got the leaf lying sideways and you're looking in from the sideways like that, and instead of a top-down view. So the top half here on above, this is the top half of the leaf where the sunlight usually shines on, and then this is the bottom part of the leaf. So you can see the different layers, so we're going to go through these layers one at a time. So first of all, we've got the top bit here. So this bit on the top is actually called the waxy cuticle. So the waxy cuticle is a waterproof layer. Now plants obviously do need water, but sometimes if there's too much water on the surface, it can actually clog up some of the openings, which are the structures found here called the stomata. There are some stomata on the top of the leaf, and if they got water filled on it, it's basically like having water up your nostrils. You can't breathe properly. So the waxy cuticle is there to protect the leaf from too much water, and actually also protects it from against pathogen entry and also insects as well. The waxy cuticle is actually on top of the upper epidermis. Now epidermis refers to a single layer of cell that is usually found on the surface of different types of organs. And it's thin enough to allow the light to go through to our next layer here, which is the middle part, and that is called the palisade mesophyll layer. So the palisade mesophyll is the main part of the leaf, and actually whenever you learn the structure of a leaf cell or a plant cell, we are almost always referring to the palisade mesophyll. So you can see they've got the nucleus there, and the permanent large vacuole. I didn't draw all of them there, but the main thing is that they've got lots and lots of chloroplast, which are the lighter green bits here. So the main function of the palisade mesophyll tissue is to do photosynthesis. So they are regularly packed. They're found near the top of the leaf, so they have access to sunlight or light quite easily, and they've got lots and lots and lots of chloroplast, or with chlorophyll, to absorb the light for photosynthesis to make glucose, which is the main food for respiration. The next layer down here, we also call these palisade cells, but because they got, you can see in this picture, they got lots of air spaces, we call this the spongy mesophyll. So the spongy mesophyll cells also have some chloroplast in them, although not drawn here. They do have some chloroplast, so they can do some photosynthesis, but the main function for them is they've got these large air spaces, so the air can travel from outside into here through the air spaces to the palisade mesophyll tissues. Then finally, we've got the lower epidermis. So as I mentioned earlier, epidermis means surface. This is the lower part of that. Now, the key thing about the lower epidermis would be the structures that are found in it. So there are more of these structures than the upper epidermis. So we've got these two cells here, and these cells are called guard cells. Now, as the name implies, they guard the opening or the exit of the leaf, which is called the stoma. So stoma is the singular form, stomata is the plural form, which we often use and mention. So the stomata are the gaps in the lower epidermis, which allows gas exchange. It allows gases to go in and out of it. The palisade mesophyll does photosynthesis, and remember that the key thing is photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide and it releases oxygen. So in this case, we actually, for the plants, the carbon dioxide would diffuse into the plant through the stoma or the stomata, and the oxygen can diffuse out of it into the surrounding area, which is the opposite to what we have in animals, where you want oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Plants want carbon dioxide in and oxygen out, and that's through the stoma. Now, the guard cells are there to control the opening of the stoma, so they can actually close the stomata if it needs to. Now, the question is, why would they need to do that? So the reason why we mention this is because the water vapor can also exit the leaf through the stomata. So sometimes if it's hot or windy, then the water can actually evaporate from the surface of leaves and exit. Now, it's not good for the plant to lose water because water is a key reactant for photosynthesis in the passate mesophyll cells. So it's not a good idea for them to lose it. So when it's too hot or if it's too dry and the plant has already is dehydrated and they lost too much water, the guard cells will actually close the stomata to prevent further loss of water. And we've got a name for that, which is transpiration. More on that in a bit. So now that we've looked at the structure of a leaf, and I mentioned transpiration, let's have a look at what is transpiration and how is that related to transport of substances. Now here we've got a plant, or a tree specifically. We've got the plant will need lots of different things. So two key things that the plants will need to do is photosynthesis and respiration, because respiration gives energy for growth and for active transport, etc. So there are a few key things, 3 key components actually, that plants can transport. So first of all, let's start with one of the key ones, which is water. Now water is mainly found in the soil, and it can be absorbed into the plant through osmosis. So osmosis is the net movement of water molecules down the water concentration gradient into the plant. Another one that also gets absorbed is minerals or mineral ions. Again, same thing, it can be absorbed into plant, but this is through active transport, which means it requires energy to move these minerals against the concentration gradient into the plant, because the plant cells have more minerals than the soil, but it needs the minerals, so it keeps using energy to keep them going in. So once the water and minerals enter the roots, they actually go into a structure called the xylem. Now the xylem actually there are loads of the xylem around, so in all of these places, across all the roots, etc. But the idea is that all of them would be connected into xylem vessels, a bundle of them actually, and they will go up the stem of the plant, and then they would then distribute to various different leaves, for example. So this is called the xylem, which is the vessel that transports water and mineral ions up the plant. Now this particular process is called the transpiration stream or the transpiration pool. Now, I mentioned the word transpiration a few times now, but what is actually transpiration? So as I mentioned earlier in this picture, the water vapor can actually evaporate and leave the plant. That particular process is transpiration. So transpiration is the loss of water vapor through, by evaporation through the stomata on the leaves and the stem. As I mentioned, it's a bad idea. However, as the water vapor leaves, it dehydrates a cell that has, let's say if this cell has lost the water vapor, they become dehydrated. They will then draw the water from the next cell, and that cell now becomes dehydrated and it draws the water from the next cell by osmosis, and you form a chain of water, a pool of water going through the different cells. And also that would be the same for the passate mesophyll cells, and that is the whole process of transpiration pool, which is you need the water to be lost through transpiration in order to draw the water up from the roots upwards. Transpiration itself is not necessarily a good thing because of the loss of water, but it is essential to allow the pull of the water minerals up the plant, so it has to happen. And there are a few things you need to know about it, which is in terms of the rate of transpiration that could be affected by a few things. So first of all, transpiration rate can be actually estimated by something called a potometer. So a potometer is a setup in a lab setting where you would measure how much water is being absorbed by the plant throughout a certain amount of time. It can change the condition around the plant to kind of investigate how the different factors actually affect the rate of transpiration. Notice I mentioned that it's an estimation because the potometer only measures how much water is actually absorbed by the plant, but that water can be used in photosynthesis. It could be used to maintain the cell's turgidity instead of all being lost through transpiration, so it's an estimation. But there are a few things that affect the rate of transpiration. First of all is the temperature. The hotter it is, then the more water evaporates because they have more kinetic energy. Another thing would be light intensity. So if there is a if there are high levels of light, then more photosynthesis is happening. They would need more carbon dioxide, so more of the stomata will open, which means more water vapor can be lost. So higher light intensity could also increase the rate of transpiration. Third thing is wind or air movement. So the windier it is, the more water vapor gets removed from the surface of the leaf, which maintains that steep concentration gradient inside the leaf and outside. So again, the water will actually evaporate quicker if it's windier. And then finally is humidity. The more humid it is, the lower the rate of transpiration, because there's more water outside the stomata, there's a less steep concentration gradient, so therefore transpiration doesn't happen quite that quickly. So in a dry condition or windy conditions, then transpiration happens faster. So that is focusing on the movement or transport of water and mineral ions up the xylem, which is transpiration pull, and that links to the concept of transpiration. Then the next thing to talk about is sugar, or glucose, because different parts of the plant, or all parts of the plant, would need the glucose for respiration, for energy. So for example, in the roots, we mentioned they use active transport to absorb the mineral ions, which requires energy. But we know that glucose, it comes from photosynthesis, which happens in the leaves. So how does the glucose actually get transported down to the roots or to other parts of the plant? So that is done by a process called translocation by the phloem. So in the leaves, they receive a light, and then they do photosynthesis, and they would make glucose and sugars. Now, the thing is, we can have different parts of the plant doing that. So some of them will have to go up, some of them have to go down. So they enter a vessel specifically called the phloem, which is able to, again, branch off. So some of them will go upwards like that, or sideways, or perhaps down the plant like this to different parts of the plant, or down to the roots like so, to this side here, and they can obviously go to all of the roots if need be, and this is called the phloem. So the phloem is a living tissue, unlike the xylem, which is a dead tissue, and it's got sieve plates in between, and it's about the movement of sugars up and down the plant. So they do something called translocation, which is exactly the movement of sugars up and down the plant. So that requires energy for them to move to different parts of the plant, and that is essential because all cells would need the sugar for respiration. So here you can see how the water and minerals and the sugars are transported by two different systems in two different types of vessels, and the xylem and the phloem are called the vascular bundle. And we can actually see how they are organized structurally in the three different types of organs over here. So starting with the one on the top, that is actually looking at the vascular bundle in the leaf. So this is the main vein of a leaf. So you can see the ridges usually on the leaf. And if we cut open the ridge there and look at the cross section, you can see that the xylem is on the top and the phloem is on the bottom there. That's how they're usually arranged. Whereas this one here is actually the stem. So with the stem, it's quite interesting. They've got the xylem in the inside of that, so that's the xylem. And the phloem is actually found on the outer edges of the vascular bundle. So when aphids, like insects, land on it, they have a sharp mouthpiece. They are able to pierce through the surface of the stem to feed off of the sugar that is transported in the phloem. But the xylem's on the inside and the phloem's on the outside. And then finally, the one on the bottom is actually how they're arranged in roots. So again, that's a cross section of the roots, so the roots are coming out towards you. And the xylem, conveniently, is found in the middle, with usually as a cross shape. So think of xylem starting with the letter X, so it's got a cross shape in the middle, whereas the phloem are arranged around it in these spaces around the cross. So again, any water and minerals would go into the xylem, into the cross-shaped section here, and then it would travel up the plant, and the phloem will be when they receive the sugar usually, and they will leave the actual phloem into the surrounding root cells. So those are the three different organs and how the vascular bundles actually arranged in the leaf, stem, and the roots. So this is the overview of the transport systems in plants. There's quite a lot of content in here, so it's definitely important that you go and study the details of that, especially about the adaptations of the leaf structures on the right hand side here, and the details about transpiration pull and translocation. Another thing they'd like to ask is the comparison in structure for the xylem and the phloem. So apart from the functional differences, which is the different things that they transport, you need to think about the direction of transport. So xylem's going up the plant, moving things up the plant, whereas phloem is about moving sugars up and down the plant. You might want to think about the structural differences, like xylem is dead, phloem is alive. Xylem is a hollow tube, phloem is not. Phloem's got companion cells, xylems don't. So there are lots of components and structural differences that you need to be aware of as well. They sometimes like to ask the potometer as a practical question. So they will show you a setup of a potometer, and they will say, okay, we're going to investigate to look at the uptake of water by the plant in different conditions, and then they will ask you to explain what might cause them to be different. Then it will be about the different conditions that they've set up, like the 4 conditions I've listed out there. Make sure you don't mix up between transpiration and transpiration pull. Okay, transpiration is the loss of water vapor by evaporation through the stomata. It is not the loss of water, because water doesn't just drip out of it. It's water vapor as a gas that evaporates out of it. Whereas transpiration pull is the movement of water, right, in comparison to translocation, which is the movement of sugars. So the words can be quite similar, but make sure you know the differences between them. So that's the overview of organizing plants.